Hey everybody, it is respiratory system time. We got to do so many things for the respiratory system, so let's dive right into it. We're going to talk about some of the big functions, some of the big events, then we'll get into the anatomy and spend a while with that. So I've got five big functions of the respiratory system. Number one, the exchange of gases. Obviously, the gases we're talking about here are oxygen and carbon dioxide. That is a huge function. We'll get to that one. Don't worry. Number two, voice production. Voice production. Um, that's what I'm doing right now. We'll talk about that one too. Pretty important one. Not as important as number one, or as number three, or as number five, but important nonetheless. Number three is the regulation of plasma pH. Remember, pH is a measure of hydrogen ion concentration. The more hydrogens you got, the lower your pH is. pH is drastically affected by carbon dioxide levels. We'll get into the chemistry of that too. So, odor detection, that's number four. It's your ability to smell smells. You can smell about 1 trillion smells, and that's your respiratory system doing that. And last but not least, because the respiratory system is open to the environment, preventing infection has gotta be one of its jobs. Okay, let's keep going. Pulmonary ventilation. That is the exchange of air between the lungs. Look at these two nice, pretty lungs here. Exchange of air between the lungs and the surrounding atmosphere. Okay, in order for air to move, there has to be a pressure gradient. All right, got to be a pressure gradient for air to flow. Now, when you're breathing in, the pressure in your lungs has got to be less than atmospheric. So atmospheric is the winner when you're breathing in. When you're breathing out, though, the lung pressure has to be the larger of the two. All right, that is one of our big events of our respiratory system. Another one is alveolar gas exchange. This is the gas exchange that occurs between the air in the lungs, specifically the air in the alveoli, the little tiny skinny sacs, and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. Obviously, we're exchanging CO2 and oxygen. CO2 moving from pulmonary capillaries into alveolar air. Oxygen moving from alveolar air into pulmonary capillaries. Of course, once you know the direction of the flow of gases, you can tell me where the pressure of oxygen is higher, where the pressure of CO2 is higher. So write that down too. You can check on me if you want. All right, what else? Another big event, gas transport. Two gases in question, of course, are still oxygen and CO2. Now, we transport about 98.5% of our oxygen bound to the iron in hemoglobin. And of course, we find hemoglobin within our red blood cells. That's a big number, 98.5%. Well, one of the things that's going to tell you is that oxygen is not very soluble in water. If it were, there would be no need to have this dedicated system of proteins and cells to carry it. All right, CO2. About 70% of your CO2 is transported in your plasma as the bicarbonate ion. Take a look. Here's CO2 in your blood right there. See it? CO2 in your blood combines with water to make bicarbonate, HCO3 minus, and also a hydrogen ion. And the bicarbonate then drifts into the plasma. We'll go over in detail the chemistry of this, more so later on. Let's keep going. We had alveolar gas exchange earlier. Now we've got systemic gas exchange, which is the exchange of CO2 and oxygen, but this time between systemic capillaries and your tissues. All right. Look at the direction of oxygen and CO2 down there at the bottom of the picture. Make sure you know where they're going and where the pressures of oxygen and the pressure of CO2 will be high and low. Okay, another event. Good old cellular respiration. That is where we are breaking down nutrients. Things like amino acids, fatty acids, and good old glucose. And we're breaking them down in order to make adenosine triphosphate, ATP. Now, where does this occur? It occurs in organelles, not unlike this one. This is a mitochondrion. And of course, in the process of doing cellular respiration, if it's aerobic at least, we're using oxygen. We're making CO2. If it's anaerobic, well, we're not. And we're not making as much ATP. All right. Let's organize our anatomy of our respiratory system. And there are two ways we can do it. There's a structural way, and that's what we have depicted here. Structurally, we can divide the respiratory tract into two parts. There is going to be an upper and a lower portion. The upper portion is basically the nose and the pharynx. All right? That's not much. That's where you get your colds. That's where you usually get sick. But not so sick that you have to go to the hospital or go to the doctor. I mean, you get a cold. Whatever, who cares, right? You're going to survive. You're going to get better. But lower respiratory tract, different story. That's our larynx, our trachea, our bronchi, the big long tubes, our bronchioles, the little long tubes, and the rest of the lung structures. That's all lower. That's the structural organization. But there is a functional one as well. Functionally, there we go. We divide the respiratory tract into two parts: conducting zone and respiratory zone. Conducting zone is your nose, your nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and most bronchioles, all the way up to terminal bronchioles. Respiratory zone is where you do exchange of gases, by the way. Conducting zone, just transport. And the respiratory zone, we've got our respiratory bronchioles, our alveolar ducts, and our alveoli. We're going to go through all these guys. So, conducting zone, main function, moving air. Secondary functions, modifying that air. Removing pathogens, particles, pollen. Adding heat and water. Question for you guys to do. Might have done it in class already, who knows? Alright, so the lining of much of our conducting zone is called a respiratory mucosa. Mucosa because it is going to be mucus producing. It is a pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells. Here are epithelial cells here. Notice it has the appearance of multi-layers. Cells are just of different heights. Most of them are columnar. They've got cilia to sweep the mucus upward. Here is a goblet cell, which is a mucus maker. Over here we see the same epithelium. Look at it again. Also notice the connective tissue layer underneath. This is the lamina propria. It is very vascular. It's going to help heat up the air. It's also got mucus and serous glands, which are going to contribute to the filtration, to the humidification, and the warming of air as well. Okay, the respiratory zone contains these little structures called alveoli. These little balls here, these are alveoli. All these little spheres, all these little balls are alveoli. They are found in respiratory bronchioles when we just have a couple, in alveolar ducts when we have a bunch in a row, and in alveolar sacs when we get a dead end and a cluster of them. Alveoli are made of simple squamous epithelium. They will be cobwebbed with pulmonary capillaries, and they will be the sites of gas exchange. So if we look, the epithelium, as we go from the nose all the way down to the alveoli, it gets thinner, less mucus, fewer cilia. Epithelium goes from pseudostratified to simple columnar to simple cuboidal to simple squamous. All right. We'll pick up next time with the nose. See you later.